Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Hello and welcome to everybody here and online joining us live or streaming. Welcome to tonight's Audit Committee meeting on Tuesday the 26th of November. We will start with apologies for absence. I have an apology from Dave Robertson. Any other?
Yeah, we've received no other apologies for absence.
Thank you. Declarations of interest. Any declarations of interest above and beyond those that are already recorded? No. Okay. That takes us on to the minutes from the previous meeting on the 18th of September. So if we go through those page by page, raise your hand if there's any points you want to make. Page 3, page 4, page 5, and page 6. Somebody move and second them.
I'll move them too.
Councillor Marshall and Councillor Vernon. Sign those off. There we go. And that takes us straight through to item 4, LWMTS annual report. We are due to have our Chief Executive present on that.
Chair, while we're waiting,
Yes.
can I make a couple of comments? Firstly, this must be the third or fourth time I've seen this annual report, and I just wonder whether we've got a bit of overkill here, and yet there are gaps that haven't been addressed. I mean, one of them is about the governance structure, and it refers later on to the need possibly to review member oversight of this. But I just wonder why Cabinet have had it, ONS have had it, just seem to have done the rounds quite a few times. And like with most annual reports, it's difficult. I hope this isn't impertinent, but it's difficult to see where some of the problems might lie, because annual reports are all about presenting a really positive account of what's gone on during the previous year.
Yes. I'd suggest potentially that the reason why we see it in addition to others is because of that those precise issues that you've raised. In Simon's absence, I'm presuming.
I'm inviting him in, but we're getting no response at the minute.
Can I ask Andrea, who is Director of Finance at LWMTS, to present the report to us?
So this report is outlining the performance of the company during 23-24. And you're right, you may have seen this before, you may have seen it at Cabinet, an overview and scrutiny, but the reason why we're presenting it to the Audit Committee is for you to have a look at the risk and the governance. So the company has grown significantly. So this is, well, last year was the second year of trading. The first year, the turnover was 500,000, whereas 23-24, it was just under 5 million. So we are growing significantly. Main reasons for that are DFG, so the Disabled Facilities Grant were brought into the company, as were leisure services, which is the reason why we've got such a growth in turnover. But the reason why, as I say, that it's been brought to Audit Committee is for you to have a look at the risks. So because the company has grown significantly, are we mitigating against that risk? Well, the front cover of the report actually lists out the risks and how they're managed by the council, and all of those risks are green after the controls have been put in place. Just talking through the reports, as you've all seen it before, I'll not go into a lot of detail, but there's a page here that highlights all of the key achievements for the year. So the company's grown, we've now got 170 staff members. 1.3 million pound of DFG grant was awarded. 148 properties have been adapted, and so on. I'll not list each one of those. The main reason why we have grown is the disabled facilities grant and leisure, and they have exceeded our expectations. And we expect that to continue. So the future for 24-25 is to see the growth of DFG, see the growth of leisure. The leisure have got an additional 14% of income compared to last year. DFG are awarding over £100,000 per month, so they are on target for their plan, and they will be using the carry forward from previous years, which was the objective of the company when it was brought into the company.
Okay. One of the questions that I didn't immediately pick out from this was the client list beyond LDC and how big that is.
Yeah, I can give you some detail of that. So external income is 840,000 expected for 24-25.
Okay, and
And for
just as a number of clients outside of Lichfield District Council, do you know that what that would be off?
I wouldn't know off the top of my head, because we've obviously whoever is awarded disabled facilities grant is dependent on applications. We have got planning. We don't know the companies who are on board with that. We also have sponsorship for communications.
Okay.
So numerous. I can give you those exact details after this meeting.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, can I come back to the earlier question? Yeah, I do appreciate it comes to audit because of risk and governance issues. So that begs the question, why does it go to so many other bodies? You know, is it appropriate? It just comes to audit and cabinet, for example. I don't know, that's a question for others, but it does seem a waste of resources and time for it to come numerous times to numerous committees. And there's almost like a false assurance in that, you know, if you feel this has been looked at by several different bodies within the council, it must be okay. And yet there's still this outstanding issue, which I have to say was identified when the new directors were appointed. Certainly the member director was appointed and it came to ONS, and I was given to understand that the leader would look again at the possibility of more than one member representative on the board. And because of the political makeup of the council, it might be appropriate to consider an additional board member from a different political group, not just the controlling group. That I know comes up in the internal audit report later on. And I think it's about time now we looked at this seriously, because this has been a query that's been up in the air now for really several months. And you know, as we've been told, the audit committee's role is about ensuring that appropriate governance is in place rather than looking at numbers. And that is a real sort of gap, in my view, as far as the LWMTS is concerned.
Yeah, and it was also the thinking behind my question about clients outside of LDC or worked on behalf of LDC. You know, if as we presumably as LWMTS looks to expand to other councils, you know, presumably we need one would have thought we needed a bigger board of directors. I know from the audit review that is it Local Partnerships LLP, the HMM Treasury Board, board recommends governance structures for LATCOs with board appointments between 5 and 10 members, including some non-exec directors with industry experience in the areas in which the company is working. So I think a good governance, according to that body, would suggest we have room for more member representation on the board. And I think, you know, my personal thought was for non-exec directors with industry experience.
This was picked up by internal audit, so we were subject to internal audit. And one of the things that they have suggested, which has been discussed at joint leadership and will be taken forward for further discussion, was setting up a shareholder group. And this is going to form part of the review of the constitution, which is currently.
Yeah, that's right, Chair. 'Cause I'm aware that the board of the company has been discussing this. There was a question at last full council also in which the shareholder representative gave assurance that he was engaging with the board on this issue, but also it will be picked up in the constitution review in terms of council side assurance over the company to make sure we've got the arrangements in place that satisfied.
And do we know what the time frame for that's the outcome of that review? So when do we put extra seats on the board?
In terms of the constitution review, I know that because that's my area, and we are working up a project plan for that, which we will be sharing with the group leaders to make sure that they're happy with the project plan of who's interviewed as part of the process, etc. And I've got that project brief in my inbox at the moment, so that will be, I imagine, start of the new year. I think we'll be beginning that. But so I'm aware the board is also looking at the issue as well.
Okay. So
Yeah, I was just going to come back, and it'd be really good to have a firm schedule on this, because we need to know that governance issue over which there's been a query has to have a sort of finite time for that to be delivered. It is on page 17 of the report that it says, following the internal audit review of LWM this year, the company directors are committed to engaging with the council over future controls, for example, a shareholder board instead of a single representative. But that doesn't have any end date to it, and that's the concern, that this could go on forever. So, can we ask, please, for
I think particularly with the speed of growth and the aspiration for further growth, the possibility is there that the company could run away from the size of its board quite quickly. And whilst I note that the internal audit rated as low, it did highlight that board, and obviously that rating will change quite quickly as the size of the company and the diversity of the company grows, I think.
Well, the board are next meeting on the 18th of December, so I'll make sure it's on the agenda for that board.
Excellent. Any more points? Okay. Thank you very much, Andrea. Feel free to shoot off as soon as you pack up if you wish. So you'll note from the agenda we are now asked to review. I think we have so reviewed, and we will move on to the mid-year Treasury Management report. Antonia.
Okay, so just a little bit of background. So we bring 3 reports to the Audit Committee on Treasury Management. So we bring a Treasury Management Strategy Statement in February each year, a Progress to Date report, so that's this report around November each year, and then an annual report in June of the following year. So you can see what we plan to do, how we're performing, and what we actually did in the year. So this particular mid-year report covers the capital budget, the reasons why it's changed from the version that was approved by Council on the 27th of February this year, the level of capital expenditure and its funding compared to that budget, the capital receipts from the sale of assets, how they compare to the budget, the level of debt through borrowing and lease type arrangements, the level of debt repayment, that's minimum revenue provision, and how that compares to the budget. Look at the balance sheet, cash flow monitoring, and the level of investments compared to the budget. And then we look at investment monitoring in a little bit more detail. So in line with the principles of security, liquidity and yield, so that's the acronym SLI, how were our service investments, so that would be the loan to the cinema, commercial investments, which we have none of these, and treasury management investments are performing compared to those 3 important principles. And then a little bit of assurance to members that to date we're compliant with all treasury limits that were set by council, and all of our prudential indicators are in line with the budgets that were approved by council for 24-25. Happy to take any questions though from members.
Anybody opening up with some questions?
Let's get to my relevance.
I'll ask a very quick question. I'm sure you, just on the return or yield of our investments. So page 42. It seems that our average yield is absolutely spot on with everybody else's at 4.9, but we do appear to have a strategic funds that is a couple of percentage points below that. Is just as an explanation to anybody else potentially reading these figures, is there a reason why that those investments are that much lower?
So prior to the current interest rate environment where interest is higher, those funds performed at a higher level than you would return on a cash basis. Their investments in a wider portfolio, so they'll include equities or shares, bonds, property potentially, private investment market. So you get a better diversification. So you're managing your risk a little bit. And as I say, they were higher yield. What's happened though is because interest rates have gone up, you're tending to get higher returns from cash investments in banks, building societies, etc. Than you are with these type of assets, which tend to return more over a longer term. But I think the important point to make is that we wouldn't necessarily, and we shouldn't, put all of our eggs in one basket when we're talking about a portfolio. So whilst it might be attractive to move all of our investments out of these funds into cash, that leaves you then vulnerable from a security point of view in the event that a bank gets into difficulty or etc. those things. So overall, the portfolio is doing well, and I think you have to look at it from an overall portfolio point of view rather than necessarily the bits that aren't perhaps performing as well as others.
Keith?
I'm only asking this on the basis I'm told there's no such thing as a stupid question, but the bit that I don't understand that I'm reading now is capital expenditure is projected to be 19,633,000, which is 650,000 higher than the approved revised budget. So I'm wondering, where has that come from? Is it because of the change to the leisure centre heating system? And if that's so, who discussed this? Because I was on the leisure centre task group and I never was part of any discussion. And who approved it? I mean, you can't suddenly have 650,000 extra spend without actually knowing what it's for and where it's come from.
So if I refer you to Appendix A, which is on page 46 of your pack, you've got the detail there of the individual projects. The most significant reason for the additional spend is about halfway down, so delivering temporary accommodation. So that's showing us about 1,079,000 more than the budget. So if I just walk you through the process on that. So when council approved the budget for this delivering the temporary accommodation, so this is where we're buying houses, so it isn't anything to do with the leisure centre, I can give you that guarantee. We set, or council approved, a budget of just about £2.157 million. When we looked at the profile of when we thought that was going to be spent, we split it equally over this financial year and the next financial year because we thought that was a realistic profile to acquire the properties. What has actually happened is when we've had discussions with the people that are leading on this project, they've basically said is their aim is to get all that money spent this financial year so they can buy the properties they need to. That means whilst we've not overspent the project budget, which covers 2 years, we're spending more than we planned in this financial year. So it's it's technically it's not an overspend, but it's a profiling as to the years that we're going to spend it in. The advantage for the council is by spending that money quicker, we're making those properties available to homeless people quicker, which means there is a financial saving on not having to use bed and breakfast and that type of accommodation. So whilst we're showing it as an adverse variance to budget, it isn't in the scheme of the entire budget. So hopefully that enough assurance for you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Chair. Anthony, on page 39, 3.36, I'm worried I might be joining the same cohort as as my friend here, when it says asking silly questions, or there's no such thing as a silly question. But 336 overall in terms of strategic investment, there is a book loss of £750,000. Can you just explain that to me, please?
Yeah, so when we bought the investments, there was a total of 14 million that we paid out. So if you look at the particular graph at 335, it shows numbers in black at the top of the bar. So there's 2 investments of 2 million and 2 investments of 5 million. The disadvantage, well, it's not a disadvantage, but the risk with these reserves is because they're traded in the market, the value goes up and down. So you can have a book loss or a book gain on these. It's not realised until you actually sell the asset. But what we did when we originally went into these investments was that we recognised this was a risk and we didn't want that to impact on the services the council delivered. So we set up an earmark reserve of 1.4 million, which is roughly 10% of the value that we went into, to cover any book losses. So at the moment, the book losses are less than the earmark reserve. If the government changes the rules around how and when you recognise the loss, that reserve would be important going forward, because it would mean we would have to charge the book loss at the point it occurs rather than carrying it into future years.
Understood. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. My question's about usable reserves and unusable reserves, and it refers in 1.6 to usable reserves projected to be 4,287,000 higher than the budget, due principally to higher than projected earmark reserves and grants. What concerns me is that the ministry's guidance is that we should not prioritise yield over security and liquidity. And what worries me is that the current council taxpayers, their money is being held in reserves rather than providing services. So those usable reserves, in my sort of simplistic way of seeing things, why aren't we using them? Why aren't we using them to fund some of the capital projects? And could they also be used for some of the revenue pressures?
So a lot of the revenue reserves you've got, so the reason they're higher than we forecast when we did the budget principally is due to deferments in capital spend. So capital spend's not occurring at the point we thought it was. So if you take the leisure centre as an example, we're not on, well, we've only just got onto site to start building, so the money is not going out of the account. So at the moment that money is sat in the bank effectively. There's a difference though between what you've got sat in the bank and what's committed, and a lot of the usable reserves, you're quite right, have been committed towards capital projects. So there's the leisure centre, the cinema, there are a number of others. If you take account of the commitments we've got, our reserves do drop down to quite a low level, well, a lower level. So whilst they look healthy at the moment, council hasn't made a decision to use a lot of those to fund capital projects, etc. So I would say whilst they look quite a high level, there is a large amount of them that are committed or they're set aside to manage risks. So quite a chunk of these reserves are set aside to manage the risk of local finance settlement changes and how those are implemented and what pace. So rather than being in the position where we have a cliff edge position with our budget, we can, if the council chooses, manage the impact of any budget reductions in a sustainable way.
I noticed in 3.24 again, MHCLG guidance requires an increase of transparency around this, and I find it really difficult to extract from the regular reports that we get, that I'm sure are absolutely above board and reliant upon us as members to interrogate them. It's the stupid question comment again. You know, it's extremely difficult to interrogate during the course of a committee meeting each of those lines of budget. What's happened to this? What's happened to that? Where are we with this? And that sort of transparency around service and commercial investment activity in 3.24. I'm not entirely convinced that we do have that transparency. I'm not doubting the veracity of you, Anthony, and your team in presenting us with the figures, but are they really as understandable as they might be, given that's a direction around transparency?
Yeah, so just on that particular area, what the government, this was following a number of failures in government in terms of its investment approach, so your Thurrocks and places like that, etc. So the aim of the guidance was to specifically provide more transparency around not only treasury management investments, but where you are investing money in, say, delivering a local service. So you give a loan to a voluntary group or something like that, which is for service investment, or the area where there was a lot of issues is commercial investments, so where councils were buying property to generate return. For us, our biggest area of risk in this area, so we've got no commercial investments.
Yeah, but a big blue question mark against that one, because I thought we've got quite a few commercial investments, but
So
clearly I'm not understanding commercial investment.
Commercial investments are done principally to just generate yield. So that would be if you bought a, you know, let's say,
Hotel.
hotel, something like that, just where you do it not for and it might be it's located in Edinburgh or Glasgow or something, so there isn't a link to the, so that is what a commercial investment's termed as. So, you know, if you're buying property just to generate yield, that's what it's for. So there is an element of risk to that, as you can see what's happened. The service investments are, as I say, the more to do with you provide a service of finance to another organisation to deliver objectives on your behalf. So that might be, there are cases where councils given loans to cricket clubs or football teams and things like that, based on them repaying them. There is risk to that, though. It's the propensity to repay it, things like that. The only one
growth from that.
There is. And I'm not saying you can't do that. I'm saying what the guidance is saying is the council needs to be very transparent on what it's doing, what the risks are, and how they're managing those risks in those situations. Our big area is treasury management, so that's why we put a lot more information in the treasury management part of it. But, you know, I take your point on whether you feel this is transparent enough, and I can certainly go away and have a look at that for future reports.
Be really welcome.
If there's any specific things you want me to have a look at, if you just drop me a line and I'll have a look at how we can facilitate that in future reports.
And just for clarity, so therefore our investment in the cinema and the retail units associated with that are not commercial investments because we're doing it for other reasons on top of financial return.
Yeah, so if you look at the reasons why we're doing it, a lot of it comes back from when we did the city master plan. So it was saying you need to do place shaping activity to ensure the vibrancy of the city. There is a incidental return to the council for that, but that is not your primary motivator or driver for doing that.
Tom,
Yeah, Anthony, this is a slightly off the wall question, I suppose, but it's probably relevant. We've talked about risk management. What's the government guidance on investing in cryptocurrency? In view of the fact that we've seen Bitcoin in the last 2 months increase by 50%. But I also remember the Icelandic bank problem when lots of local authorities invested very heavily in Iceland because they were offering 0.5% more than anybody else. So I'm well aware of the risk element of these investments, but obviously you look at something like cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, which has shown massive returns, huge returns actually, if we'd invested 6 years ago. So is there any government guidance on that, or is that would be classed as ultra risky?
So I don't think there's any specific guidance, but I'd probably refer you back to what the guidance in place generally is around security, liquidity, yield. So at the end of the day, the council is here to provide services to the local populace. We're not here as a primary driver to take risks with money on the basis we might get high returns, because the downside for the council is if we lose the money with our ability to deliver services curtailed. And you can see that with other types of investment with councils, what the consequences of doing that are. I also, and I've said this to previous audit committees and cabinets, I don't think I would ever go into an investment I really didn't understand the risks around, and I couldn't explain them to councillors. So that's the guidance around it, and it's probably it's more to do with the motivation of being a council rather than a commercial entity.
Can I just come back on that?
Yes.
I think I would have been extremely concerned had you said that you were considering going.
I mean, at the end of the day as well,
That was the answer I was almost looking for.
we have to bring, as part of the treasury management statement, there is a list of the investments the councils we would have to come back, get council's approval. And I think, given what you've just said there, it's probably very unlikely in any case.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
So just one final point, mentioned back to Keith's point on the apparent overspend on temporary accommodation, which is just a timing issue. I noticed that that's countered by apparent underspends in adventure golf and paddle tennis. Are those timing issues, or are those underspends on those projects?
I believe they are timing issues.
Okay, thank you. Unless we have any more points on that, then I think we've been asked to review that and review the outcome. So reviewed, and we move on to item 6, the internal audit progress report. Again, as with the previous meeting, our audit manager is currently, well, I believe has just returned to work, but I wouldn't be expecting him to be attending the meeting given his recent absences. So I think Anthony is standing in for him, and we obviously wish him our best.
Okay, so this is the second of 4 reports we bring to the audit committee to monitor progress on delivery of the internal audit plan that the committee approved on the 21st of March 2024. So as at Q2, so that's up to the end of September, we've achieved a completion rate of 25% compared to a profile target of 38%. The progress is obviously below the target level. However, during the third quarter, and I've included this in the table in the report, the number of audits being progressed has increased significantly. We've actually procured additional capacity from BDO to undertake more audits at an increased pace to deliver a higher completion level. And for reference, that capacity over both authorities, so not just us, is 40 extra days that we've brought in. We've completed 4 internal audits. All have achieved a reasonable assurance. 15 medium and 12 low priority recommendations have been identified, no high priority. And in terms of outstanding audit recommendations, overall the numbers increased by 22, but that includes 27 that have been added from the 4 completed audits. We've also significantly reduced the number of high priority recommendations from 15 to 6. So happy to take any questions on that. If I can't answer the question, I'll have to come back to you.
Any questions?
Just wonderful.
Sue, then Tom.
Yes, paragraph 3.9 was an increase in the recommendations to management from internal audit, and I really can't see why there should be. We've had lots of outstanding recommendations, and there are some outlined in the appendix for, from Q1. Concerns about climate change, for example, on page 71, apparently according to my notes, and I really can't understand, if the organisation is absolutely on top of these governance issues, why those recommendations are being delayed. I mean, there may be capacity issues or whatever, but I don't think we as an audit committee can keep tolerating the increase in recommendations and recommendations that aren't accepted. So it's a sort of shot across the bows, like from this committee, which we've tried several times before. But perhaps Anthony's got some mitigating circumstances that he give us.
Yeah. So I think there's a number of competing issues here. A lot of these recommendations do date back a number of years. I think if you look at the profile of them, I suspect, and I can't say this is genuine, but I suspect there are a number of them have either been closed, but if the admin part of closing them hasn't taken place, or they're out of date, to be honest, with recommendations. I've seen, I mean, I know this is a priority at least, Tim, because we discuss it each time a report comes. And, you know, the chair's now starting to call managers and directors in to emphasise the importance of this. I was working through with a number of my managers earlier this week. But I suspect what's happened here is that over the period of the recommendations coming up, there have been other priorities. Capacity has been a challenge, not least during the period of implementing things like being a better council, where priority was diverted elsewhere. So I'm not saying that is the right thing. I'm just saying that there are reasons why these haven't been progressed, and perhaps we're in a situation now where those reasons no longer exist and they do need to be reduced significantly.
Yeah, so and to pick up on your point, we did have Ian and Kerry here at the last meeting. Unfortunately, we weren't able to organise another manager to attend this meeting, but we are looking to do that for next. And I think what might be useful between now and the next meeting is if we, as committee members, if I have a list of all the outstanding recommendations circulated to us, so that we can pick those up in time for the next meeting. I believe we've already spoken to at least one manager who will attend the next audit committee meeting. In the meantime, of course, we will should be on course to have recruited a new internal audit manager by that point. And Tom and I will be looking to meet with the new internal audit manager as soon as we can, once they've got their feet under the desk. And obviously we'll take a look at those outstanding recommendations with them, because I'm quite sure they will want to reduce that number as quickly as possible. I believe there was a number that was supposed to come off after our previous meeting, that we're just waiting for internal audit to sign off on. So they may already have been closed. They're just waiting for the sign off before they can be formally closed.
Yeah, and that may well be the case, but the capacity challenges that they've had in the team might mean that hasn't been followed through. So that's what I'm saying. There could be an administrative element to this in not closing them off.
Yeah. Tom.
Thank you, Chair. Anthony, page 50, we have a table on under 3.4. And one of the items there near the bottom is cyber incident preparedness and response. What's the progress on that? Because without being too alarmist, I see that as being something which should very much be a priority.
So I believe that was always scheduled to take place in Q4. And so I believe that was the agreement between the ICT auditor and Ian as the manager. I suspect, and I can't be genuine about this, but if it was scheduled for Q4, that would imply there isn't an immediate priority, and the ICT auditor is comfortable with the approach we're taking to mitigating risk in that area, and that's why he's comfortable to do the audit in Q4.
Thank you.
John?
Yeah, again on 3.4, the waste reforms and project planning, it's not yet started in progress at all. Is there any reason why we're not starting that one?
I think this was an audit we added because we're aware there's quite a number of reforms coming over the horizon in waste. So food waste, there are things like electrification, the vehicle fleet, etc. So what we wanted to do is to ensure that there was sufficient capacity and project management arrangements in place to manage these projects. I think there's probably a couple of reasons why this isn't moving forward at the pace we thought it would. One is that there's a bit of inertia at government at the moment about how some of these projects at a national level are going to be rolled out and at what pace. So if I give you the example of the food waste, we've had the capital funding, but we still haven't had information on implementation funding or how the revenue costs of it will be delivered. So yes, we can look at buying the vehicles and procuring the vehicles and the containers, but in terms of what the approach is to implementing it, we still don't know what that is. And I think the other thing is that again, they're a team that have got competing priorities at the moment, so they're probably in a position where if that isn't clear what they need to and when by, they're probably diverted resources into some of the other things like procuring the fleet as they are looking to do for the 1st of April next year.
Okay, any other points? The one issue for me is I know our net zero and climate change work is covered within some of these risks, and therefore is audited. I just wonder whether it becomes an important enough goal of the council that it should form an internal audit project of its own, and therefore give us as an audit committee an opportunity to interrogate those specific goals. I guess that should be something we probably bring up with the new internal audit manager when they take up post.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something for the committee to consider. You've obviously got new internal audit plan that will start being formed after Christmas, so it might be an area you look at there. What I would also say is there's a half-year performance report that's going to Open Scrutiny Committee and Cabinet in the next week or so. Within that, there is updates on some of the green communities agenda, which includes the digital dashboard and some of the carbon elements. That probably does fit nicely into Open Scrutiny, but there's nothing to stop this committee starting to look at the arrangements that's put in place to manage and monitor the implementation of that strategy and approach.
Thank
I would just draw attention to page 71, which I've noted the reference there to climate change, and this notion that you monitor this quite closely, and that might be a project not just for internal audit, but for us as an audit committee, rather than sort of taking individual reports, just looking at this sort of overall strategy in terms of climate change.
Yep. Okay. So the recommendation is to note internal audit, but I think we will have said that we have reviewed the auditor's annual report, and with that move on to item 7, the risk management update.
Chair, can we also make sure on all of these where we've reviewed and noted that there's some recognition of the comments and recommendations that we've made as well, so we're not just sort of nodding them through.
So yeah, absolutely. That takes on to risk management update. In Andrew's absence, are you taking that again, Anthony?
I'm doing last one, hopefully. So again, this is a periodic risk update to the committee. So just again for context, the approach to risk register and risk management at the council is based around what's known as a 3-line of assurance process. So first line is internal controls that are in place, operated by managers and staff in their processes. So if I take the finance area, that's how do we approve expenditure. Second line of assurance is around oversight and monitoring activity. So again, with finance, that would be a budget monitoring report. And the third line is independent assurance. So that would be internal audit, external audit, any other regulatory bodies, their review of processes, systems, and highlighting of any concerns or weaknesses. So on this particular report, we're looking at strategic risks. So again, those are the factors that could potentially impact the council's ability to deliver Lichfield District 2050. In terms of these risks that are in the report, there's 7 of them currently. They are reviewed regularly by leadership team. In the most recent review, there's no changes to the current scores and they're all assessed as material. The only minor changes are to do with words or clarifications on narrative. We've shaded those in yellow for members. We also have a little section at the bottom of that around horizon scanning risks. So these are risks that have been identified, but they've not reached the status of a strategic risk. So there might be something that's pipeline, a consultation by the government, for instance, about changing something in local government, but actually hasn't been implemented. We also have included information on what I call strategic project risks. So these are significant projects being undertaken by the council that are starting to move to delivery phase, and therefore they potentially present risk to the council. So there are 3 of those. The leisure centre is one of them, the cinema is a second one, and then the redevelopment of the Birmingham Road site is the third one. We've reviewed them at the most recent leadership team. Again, we've made no changes to those scores. The leisure centre is assessed at the lowest level of risk as tolerable, and the 2 other projects, cinema and Birmingham Road site, assessed as material. We also have what's known as sub-strategic or operational risk registers. So each area has one of those for lower level risks, and we do monitor those to see if any of the risks that are identified need to be escalated, including the strategic risk register. Happy to take any questions on that one as well.
Keith?
Something I'd looked at on strategic project risks, where it says that these risks are owned by the major projects team. And I wondered who or what is the major projects team? Who are they? And well, that's the first question. Who are they?
So it's a team of 3 people headed up by John Smith, who's the programmes manager. Martin Gritt, you might have come across from pedestrianisation, and Karen Higgins. They're the 3 members of the project team. They're all permanent employees of the council.
You said that was the first question. Any
No,
follow-up?
Well, I didn't know who or what the projects team was, and I thought it was a group of councillors.
Right.
I would be saying, well, what are their qualifications for doing it? Because I wouldn't feel qualified, but I think you've answered the question with what you've said.
So,
Yeah, Keith and I were talking about these major projects before the meeting started, and my concern is that perhaps it's a bigger concern than I anticipated, that there are 3 people in the major projects team, and such a huge amount of the council's financing and reputation, service delivery rests on that major projects team. And right at the end of the report on page 91, it says that these regular reviews are in progress by the projects team, but I don't see anywhere where councillors are regularly reviewing the progress or otherwise with these major projects, and they are such big projects. As I say, you know, should there be some consideration for councillors to get, perhaps audit committee, to get a regular update of, you know, RAG ratings on some of these major projects, because, you know, huge risks in all sorts of ways, or potential risks that we want to know are completely being mitigated and covered. So it's about the member oversight as well.
Yeah.
I'm slightly concerned.
I mean, one of the reasons we've included these 3 projects in this risk is exactly what you've said. They are big risk projects, not only in finance but reputation and delivery. There's nothing to stop the committee saying you would like to have more oversight over these, and you would perhaps like a regular update from that team on the project delivery. You could request attendance by one or more of the team to ask questions around the particular projects, the risks, how they're being mitigated, managed. That is something that's within the remit of the committee if you choose to do that.
Chair, I would propose that we do that, you know. Now, I don't want to step on the toes of overview scrutiny committee, you know, but I think one or other of us needs to oversee this, and for us to oversee that project delivery, it's not about, you know, do the numbers stack up or anything like that. It's, are all of the appropriate mitigating factors in place, you know, is there proper risk management, are the contingency plans, how's the timeline looking, and I think that would be a really useful interview or report for us.
okay. Tom, is that yours on that point?
No. It's
Okay, so if just so so we are proposing to ask somebody from that major projects team to come to committee to answer questions about the processes for a particular project, or
Well,
US
yes,
or 3 projects.
they're
Okay.
big projects.
Can I just ask as well, sorry, Chair, would you like a report or a briefing note to be submitted before the meeting that gives you a very high level view of each project and its progress? So that you
Yeah,
can,
I
Keith?
think it would be nice to have a report on the projects,
Yeah,
so we know what's going on, because at the moment we're just told it's, what does it say? They look at it or they oversee it, but
Yeah.
what does that entail? We just accept that somebody's looking at it. Well, does that mean?
And is that something we can bring forward for the next meeting, or?
Can certainly see if it fits within the workable timescales of those
Yes,
officers
yeah.
and invite them along.
Yeah, next meeting or the one after that would, yeah, we'll pick.
there it does say
Yeah.
several times there are regular reviews by the major projects team,
Okay.
and they're not going to be reviewing, you know, there must be some information that we could
Yeah.
send to us, even if they're not able to attend.
I know they've got a project tracking system that tracks all of this. So in theory, it should be a case of just extracting that information and providing it with them.
That's something that Tom and I would, together with the projects team, can work on getting it to the next meeting possible. Yes. Okay, Tom.
Thank you, Chair. Anthony, I'm just looking at page 88 actually, and this is about LDC's withdrawal of the local plan earlier this year, and the risks associated with that. Now, it does appear as though we've mitigated those risks very successfully, but of course, we also have the added impact now of the new government's determination to build a lot more houses. I was speaking with the leader of the planning department, Artemis Ansel, and she was making it quite clear that the government has totally underestimated the requirements for local authority planning personnel. We will be no different to all the other authorities in this country, which are being asked to, or tasked to, build a lot more houses. It worries me that as a local authority, we don't have the personnel at the moment to administer the planning services. And I think that is a concern, not just for this local authority, but nationwide. It's a major concern. And I know that we will do all we can to ameliorate the problems, but I still see it as a massive risk.
I think that's why we included the risk originally, which was focused on the withdrawal of the local plan. But as we put in yellow here, it's been amplified by the new government's agenda in developing housing. Probably, I don't know how much this mitigates it, but I think the new government have set aside money in the national level. I can't remember, there was something like 50 million to recruit. I think it's something like 300 new planning officers across the country. Whether that is sufficient to deliver the agenda is another question, but I suppose to add balance to that, they have put some resource aside to help deliver their targets. But, you know, you are quite correct, it is a significant increase in workload. Yes.
Reading articles in the press recently, people in the know within the planning sphere have said that trying to recruit that many planning officers is going to be highly unlikely, almost impossible. And they've said that the only way that the number of personnel can be reached is by bringing retired planning officers out of retirement. So there is a mountain to climb, it seems, as I say, not just for this authority, but for planners and planning departments all across the country. And I think it is a major concern. It's something which we need to be fully aware of.
Thank you. Is that on this point?
It's on this point, really, because, you know, we are through LWMTS appointing apprentices in the planning department. So, you know, we're slightly ahead of the game in comparison to other local authorities, perhaps. But, you know, government will do what government will do, and local authorities have got to respond. It's not, you know, no point in us just sitting by the sidelines and wringing our hands, because people out there need houses.
Yeah.
You know, that is in terms of risk, and the risk to the authority is nothing like.
We risk straying into a political discussion, which is not our place.
But you know, we've got to be conscious of those political decisions and, you know, anticipate some of those
Yeah.
impacts and try to get ahead of the curve rather than wring hands.
John,
On SR 7 and 8, on pages 86 to 90, our current score is higher than our target score. When are we likely to get down to the target score, and what are we doing to get there?
So certainly on the cyber one, I think that's quite a volatile score. We've said previously, if, for instance, a war breaks out in Europe and a hostile player is involved in that, such as a nation state, that score can increase quite significantly. I think there is only so much we can do to mitigate that risk. At this point, obviously, the current score is determined to be higher than the target score. But we try and do as much as we can. So, you know, Ian would tell you that we implement all the patches that come out from Microsoft and providers. We regularly train our staff in terms of being aware of what the risks are, what to look out for, so phishing attacks, all these type of things. We do penetration testing, so we'll employ ethical hackers to test our systems. So we will do as much as we can. But, you know, as you see with other public sector or private sector, simple breach can be made by somebody inadvertently clicking on a link they shouldn't have done. And you can see what the consequences of that are. So I don't know whether we'll ever get down to the target score or below, because a lot of the factors are outside of our control on this particular one.
okay. So one final question from me on SP3. So we're on page 93, which is the project to redevelop the Birmingham Road site. We had a major step on that project recently when we decided on a third bidder, which there were two preferred bidders that were brought to councillors. What point do we review the process in that decision? Because the actions responsible timescale suggests a post-project review. Well, we have two further major decisions to be made in that project, and it seems to me a post-decision review of that decision process might benefit the rest of the project.
I mean, again, that might be something as your projects team call that maybe you want to broach with them about their approach, their arrangements for undertaking post-project reviews, see what they say, and then as a committee you could even request a post-project review of that, what took place on that, just to give you the assurance that there's a robust process in place.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Okay, and with that, so we have reviewed the risk management update. I think we've received assurance on the actions being taken, but we've also made some decisions on what we would like to do over the next couple of meetings ourselves to pursue further details. And with that, on to item 8, Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act. Mark.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act 2000, it gives local authorities a legal framework to follow if they carry out surveillance. And it's a requirement that we review the policy on an annual basis and provide members with a report on the use of any of the powers covered by the policy. And I can confirm that the Council hasn't in fact carried out any surveillance under the 2000 Act in 2023-2024, and also there's no immediate prospect of these powers being used in the foreseeable future. However, the report does is there to provide assurance to members that a framework is in place should we need to use investigatory powers at some point, and it also provides an opportunity to review that framework. There are some minor changes just to keep the policy up to date that are highlighted, but there's no material changes to the policy recommended, which was previously approved last year. So I'm happy to take any questions on that report, Chair.
Yeah, so the one point from me is further to the excellent training we all received last week. is around the approval and whether it's our position to approve this policy or recommend approval to Cabinet or Council, or whether the changes are so minor that we in fact have a delegated approval.
I think there's with this policy, I think myself, I would have to check if it's in consultation with another officer to make minor non-material changes, and we're not recommending any material, but it is in the sort of best practice guidance that the members receive assurance that the powers are being applied appropriately on an annual basis. But as it happens, that this is to report that they're not being applied at all, but there is a policy there for the event that we wish to.
Okay, so
Yeah, can I just ask a question about the threshold for where this policy kicks in? Because, you know, we see reports of, say, taxi drivers who've been breaching the conditions of licence, or traders fly tipping when they shouldn't be, you know, what, and even things like dog fouling, you know, the people are sort of investigated. What's the threshold for the implementation of this?
This is if it's covert and if it's pre-planned. So if you were carrying out an operation on a specific individual, for example, you pre-planned that and you was doing it in a covert manner. So perhaps the kind of thing might be your CCTV isn't covered because it's a general system. Everybody's aware that it's there and it's not homing in. If he was using it to follow the movements of a specific individual over a period of time, it would become covered, but it's not. However, if you was aware of somebody that had been fly tipping, for example, and you wanted to mount an operation to catch them in the act, then that would fall under the because it's pre-planned and it's covert. So
There've been no such actions by the council.
No, in fact, it's quite a high threshold to cross to be able to use that. It's got to be an offence that carries a custodial sentence in excess of 6 months. So it's got to be a reasonably serious offence that you think somebody's committing in order to be able to start to use these powers.
Anthony.
So I was just going to add to what Mark said. There is also, Mark will explain this a bit more, it's not just about CCTV, it can be monitoring social media. That falls into it. So if you were in a covert way monitoring somebody's social media, that potentially comes under the remit of the policy.
That is the area that probably is at most risk of people straying into inadvertently. The others are quite obvious, you know, but there is a risk, and which is why we emphasise that in training. If you're just taking material from an open Facebook page profile, it's not. But if you was to strike up in the same way as in the physical world, if you're to strike up a relationship with somebody on social media in order to extract some information, you start again to fall under the auspices of this act.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other points? Okay, so we have received the monitoring report, and I think looking at the two changes, there's only really two changes, and there's the name of this committee and the change in somebody's role. So I think we can probably let me say, if it needs that we recommend somebody else approve it, then we so recommend. Otherwise, if we are within our own delegation to approve, then we approve. There's a fudge. Takes us on to item 9, the Auditor's Annual Report for Lichfield District Council. We have Laura with us.
Thanks, Chair. So the purpose of the Auditor's Annual Report is our kind of completion wrap-up document for the 23-24 process of the external audit. So I'll go through that, but if I take you back just before I do to the September committee, Anthony did bring the financial statements for, I believe they received delegated approval at chair level. They haven't come back, but there has been one amendment to the financial statement. So I'll take you through that. And then if there's any questions, I think we can pass over to Anthony or work through how we're going to get that approval from the chair. So looking at the financial statements, we are proposing to give an unmodified and unqualified audit report, which means we consider the financial statements to be a true and fair representation of what is contained within them. We also have responsibility to review the narrative report and the annual governance statement, and we're satisfied that it is consistent with our understanding and compliant with the requirements under the code. We also undertake a value for money assessment, which looks at the arrangements that the council have to deliver financial sustainability, governance and economy, efficiency and effectiveness in the use of its resources. And we haven't identified any significant weaknesses to report. We only have a requirement to report by exception under value for money, but we have made one small other recommendation, which is a best practice recommendation in relation to that. As auditors, we've got a number of additional powers that we do have the ability to use should we need to, such as public interest reporting, statutory recommendations, and we don't have any requirement to use any of those additional powers for the council. And we are proposing to sign our audit opinion as soon as we get the assurances from the County Council Pension Fund Auditor, KPMG. We're hoping to have them by now. We've been hoping to have them for quite a while, but we are getting information from them that we expect it by the end of November. As soon as we get them, it'll take a couple of days for us to turn it around and sign the opinion, but that doesn't stop the accounts being approved as and when following this meeting. In terms of the value for money, I won't go through the detail of the report because, as I say, there are no significant weaknesses that we wish to highlight. But when it comes to the improving economy, efficiency and effectiveness, we have highlighted one best practice recommendation, which has come from a number of different conversations we've had with either chief exec or other officers at the council. And this relates to the council understanding how much it actually costs to provide individual services, like a cost benefit analysis, so we can see, or the council can be assured over, you know, how much it is actually costing them to deliver each individual service. And I think that is on the council's radar to be looking at anyway, but we just thought it was worth highlighting here that we do think it would be valuable to do that. The other point, probably just to draw your attention to, is we have made some internal control recommendations as well. We've got 3 at the back of the report, all of which are amber, which mean that they're considered to be other deficiencies, so they don't impact our audit to a material level. And we have received adequate responses back from management. Particularly on the first one, we have highlighted that there were a number of Anthony doesn't have access to post journals, but there were a number of journals posted where Anthony had requested them to be posted, effectively mitigating the control. But we have received back quite a comprehensive list of what other compensating controls exist. So I am satisfied that that doesn't cause an additional level of risk.
That's right.
And then the other 2 relate to Civica and how the system is being used. So I think the first point was when staff leave the council, our recommendation is that they are taken off the system completely and don't have access to any of the applications. And the final one is we understand that Civica staff, so actually staff at the supplier, do have access to the system, but it's not done on an individual named basis, so it does make monitoring of who has access to the system difficult. But as I say, none of the control deficiencies that we've identified impact on our audit. I'm happy to pause there in case there's any questions on that report before we go on to the subsequent reports.
I vaguely recall we've discussed the issue of journals that Anthony's had been placed in a position where he's had to request that before, and I can't remember whether that was part of this year's conversation or a previous.
This year's.
I think it's probably because we've brought the report. It's almost like the public facing version of the report that we bought last time.
Okay, that's fine. So is that something we can address in medium to long term?
So I think reason that I was doing it was to help out at a time where we've got capacity issues rather than not achieve the deadline or put staff under due pressure. We're now fully up to establishment, so we can find an alternative way of doing that.
You don't expect it to come up next year, for example?
No, unless we lose staff. You know, I don't think I'd ever be in a position where I'd expect staff to work inordinate level of hours or be put under undue pressure when I had the ability to help out in there. I just don't think that's something I could, to be honest. So yes, there might be a compromise on internal control for that, but in my view, the outcome is a far better outcome.
So you're happy with the mitigations and the controls? Does that include your request going through somebody who's not directly reporting to you?
Yeah, so it would probably be somebody else undertaking the request rather than me undertaking it. So there is I haven't got the ability to influence the accounts or unduly or override the controls, let's just say, because that's the concern.
And anybody you're asking to do something has an immediate line of report that they could, if they felt uncomfortable doing something, they have an immediate person they can turn to. And okay,
so my deputy is in charge of doing the accounts. I would expect that they would go down that route. They could even go to another manager or internal audit or anything like that.
And that's clearly obvious to them. Okay.
And as part of our audit, we do actually request and ask those questions of everybody in the finance team as well. So they have a channel to report to external audit directly as well.
Any more points for everyone? Okay.
I just welcome that recommendation on the value for money issue, improving economy, efficiency and effectiveness, because, and again, it's sort of that conversation we've had previously about major projects. I think, you know, it's members' assurance that, you know, we are getting value for money and, you know, council taxpayers' funds are being used as effectively and efficiently as possible. So that's really welcome, and I'm sure we'll be keeping our eye on it and making sure that we're looking at it in the future. So thank you.
Karen. Yeah.
So I'll just touch on the audit findings report, which, as I say, you have seen the draft version of this report, so I'll only highlight bits that have changed. I haven't got page number on the pack, but page 20 of our report sets out the audit adjustment that has been processed to the accounts since you last saw them. So this relates to the ground lease for buildings at Bakers Lane precinct, and they are due to be exchanged imminently for, well, effectively go through an exchange, which, after discussing with Anthony, we have both decided that it sits better as an asset held for sale at the balance sheet date. So it is largely just a reclassification from other land and buildings into an asset held for sale. However, there is a slightly different way to recognise the value of an asset held for sale, where you would hold it at the current carrying value rather than the revalued amount. So what we have had to do is just reverse the increase that went through the revaluation reserve at the balance sheet date. So that is having an impact on the CIES, or the income and expenditure statement, but it doesn't have an impact on the general fund. So that impact to the I&E is 395,000, but apologies, I have spotted a typo on slide 20, so I don't know whether I can send an updated version at a later date.
It's a minor change.
It is a minor change, yes. I'll let you know the wording. And then on the unadjusted misstatements, there are two unadjusteds that weren't previously reported. So the first one relates to indices that have been applied to other land and buildings. So the council's valuer will use an indices to help value the property, and we noticed that they were slightly So it's something we're going to pick up with the external valuer going forward, but that amounted to 279,000, which isn't material to the financial statements. The only other item we've noted on here is we had a debtor that looked to be duplicated. It only amounted to 44,000, but when we've extrapolated that over the whole debtor population to look at a worst case scenario, that has an impact of 306,000. So it would never be appropriate to adjust for something like that. We just do that extrapolation to show that there isn't a material risk to the accounts. That's the only update to the financial statements since you've last seen them, other than minor disclosures.
The reclassification of the asset, that's the one where effectively we, Tom and I together have delegated approval to sign that off as an adjustment because it's non-material. Just before we get into the larger point, do any committee members have any questions around that? Are you comfortable that it is a technical reclassification of the asset rather than an actual misrepresentation of monies? Yes, go ahead.
Let me just clarify, it is a material value, but it is a reclassification, and the amount in the revaluation reserve isn't material.
So you're happy with that for Tom and I to approve that? Okay.
Can we just minute that as well?
Yeah.
The committee.
Okay. The only question I had that jumped out at me, that on the debtor of 44,000, I mean, it's a fairly large debtor, which makes me wonder what the possibilities of it being repeated elsewhere across the debtor population are. Yeah, does that level of risk seem overrepresented?
Yes, potentially. And I think that probably is why we go through the extrapolation to show worst case scenario if this was applied on a consistent basis across all debtors. But I don't consider that it would be that large. It probably is isolated. We just didn't have enough evidence to be able to conclude that it would only happen in that one instance.
And are we happy that our processes were sufficiently robust that there was no risk of us paying it twice?
So on this particular one, I think it occurred when we had a change of individuals in a role in a particular team, and as I understand it, it was raised by the outgoing individual, and then a new member of staff came in, didn't realise it had been raised, and raised it for a second time. So
Should that not automatically flag up if you've got the same invoice number and date? Or
I think the complexities with this were potentially around it was a different developer that it was built to. The name may well have changed. So I suspect somebody that was in the role for Continuum spotted it. In fact, somebody new came in, obviously thought this hadn't been raised, presumably looked to see if it had been raised previously on the development name, didn't see it, and therefore raised it for a second time. I think that's what's happened here.
Okay. Any questions from John?
On page 23 of your report, 2 of the adjustments have not yet been agreed. Can you sign off your paperwork before they're agreed?
No, but I have received the updated accounts from Anthony today, so we'll be checking the financial statement updates tomorrow, assuming that they have been done, which I'm pretty certain they have. We will check those, and then there will be no kind of further questions on that.
Okay. And we are receiving that report. No questions, thank you. And that brings us to the work programme. Again, any points? Any points? For the next meeting, we should have a manager lined up to talk about their outstanding audit recommendations. Are we happy to do one per meeting, and allow the leasing effect of us calling managers in to
Might
encourage other managers to
Yeah.
take a look at theirs and hopefully get theirs cleared up before we call on them.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm just going to say you probably need to think about adding major projects while there's transition work program, so it's regularly coming.
Yes.
It's whether at this stage we want to sort of flag up sort of cross-cutting, if you like, of things like climate change or workforce development or equalities and diversity. We were sort of emboldened to do that through the training that we received last week, rather than looking at individual sort of options of financial report, looking at some of the sort of more strategic role arching policy issues. I'm not making a suggestion that we have 3.5-hour meetings or anything like that, but or creating work, but if we can sort of just be conscious of that.
Yes, so that's certainly something I'm keen to do, and it's rather than make any decisions today, what I wanted to do was have a discussion with the officers and potentially with the leadership team as to how we best do that, because it may involve some changes to how we monitor those activities. If you as a committee are happy for Tom, if you're happy to work with me on that one, if you as a committee are happy for Tom and I to work with officers and leadership team and to try and bring that about,
and perhaps trying as well to streamline some of the the issue I brought up first report about the annual report of LWMTS. Does it need to go through 3 committees when it could go through one? I don't know, but Anthony's perhaps got a view on that.
So I think what be opportune as part of the constitution review would be to have a look at the terms of reference to the committee, because at the moment, as the training suggested last week or highlighted, there is a list of functions that come through this committee. Now that could be that another committee is already fulfilling some of that, but I suppose it's making sure that another committee is doing that, and whether that is the most appropriate committee or whether it would be more appropriate to come here. And you could then look at issues of duplication. So does the LWM annual report need to go to overview scrutiny or does it still need to go to both? And I think those are the sort of things you probably need to have a look in the round as part of the review of the constitution for each committee, which committee, what they do, to be honest.
So from as chair, I can see a role for it, a reason for it to go to 3 committees, because each committee's approach is different. Our discussion obviously around the board and the reasons for potentially having an increased board may not be appropriate for overview and scrutiny to make those suggestions. So I can see that.
I think that's it, Chair, isn't it? Because they're looking at slightly different perspectives. So you in service delivery when it put at the annual, for example, and then overview and scrutiny may also be scrutinising the delivery element of it, and the risk and the governance elements were looked at by this committee. It could well be something as part of a constitution review. You feel that scrutiny can adequately fulfil some of those roles, but at the moment the governance and the risks sit with this committee, hence the 3 hearings that report goes to.
Particularly early days and as the council is looking to increase what LWMTS does,
but it does flag up those issues as far as the review of the constitution is concerned, about the relative responsibilities and roles of overview and scrutiny and audit. But I think it's fair to say, really, audit committee hasn't had the profile in the organisation it deserves, and I am emboldened to say that because of the training that we had last week. How important audit is to the security of the organisation as a whole. So let's big ourselves up a bit.
I've got the words terms of reference written down in my notes in big letters, and some homework from.
I'm sure Mark has as well. Yeah.
Okay, and that brings us to the end of the meeting at 7:25. Thank you very much.